Hi, everybody. I'm Pete Christensen,
I'm Coffee Brown.
and this is episode 51 of Don't Die Dumb. I want to start today by answering some questions from viewers, and we'll get into a couple topics. Number one, um, I don't, I don't appreciate. This is a viewer telling me, I don't appreciate calling MAGAs Nazis, but I do think they may be on a slippery slope because of the constant hate speech. How do you two feel about that? Well, any kind of hate speech is bad in my experience. But I've been guilty of it myself when called names. I try not to name call, but I will say, why do you support this or why do you support that? In a very mean spirited way, because I get very defensive. Sometimes I get overly defensive with people that are just trying to have a conversation with me. But the question is, are they on a slippery slope? First blaming Mexicans, then Muslims, and then the people up in Minnesota. What is the Ethiopians,
Haitians.
Haitians,
Oh, and also, Somalis.
Somalis? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think pitting races and religions against each other is very Nazi-like.
So I'm going to pile on to that a little bit and say, first of all, we have very out of the closet anti-Semitic people throughout the administration. Pete Hegseth has a Nazi tattoo. At MAGA rallies, you have people sporting Nazi swastikas, Nazi paraphernalia. You on the Republican chat rooms and so forth, you have lots of documented bragging about being Nazis, glad to bring back Nazism. When there was a march at which neo-Nazis showed up, American Nazis showed up uninvited in full Nazi regalia to intimidate the BLM people, Trump said, well, there's very good people on both sides. And and by the way, this is not Republicans, this is Trumpism. The Republican Party is meaningless anymore. It's the cult of Trump. And Trump has endorsed trying to purge people of color from this country. People from white countries can get in pretty easily, but people from non-white countries have a much more difficult time getting in by policy. Hegseth is trying to purge black people. Hegseth and Trump are trying to purge black people from our historic records. We're going to talk about one of those today, as a matter of fact, as an example, not as an outlier. And remember that Hitler went after gay people, Jewish people,
Gypsies,
what he called leftists, gypsies, people of color. So if it walks like a Nazi, talks like a Nazi, wears regalia like a Nazi, it's a goddamn Nazi. And that is not protected speech. The Constitution explicitly does not protect sedition. So the people who attacked the White House on January 6th, the Confederate nation, and the Nazis, so the Confederate flag and Confederate paraphernalia, none of those are protected speech because they have declared war on the Constitution. And although he doesn't seem to have ever realized it, the oath of office Trump took was to protect the Constitution. He has never had a day that he hasn't been attacking the Constitution. So yes, it is in fact a Nazi party. And pretending that it isn't while marching next to people wearing swastikas is just ridiculous. I agree, it sounds like a bad thing. I agree, it's terrible that everybody who thinks of themselves as Republican gets branded as Nazis. But remember, Hitler never actually had the majority of the public behind him in Nazi Germany either. The people who have the power and who are being supported by Republicans, not realizing how they're being sucked in, are in fact Nazis. And if you think that sounds like a bad word, stop supporting it.
Let me remind everyone that both Steve Bannon and Elon Musk gave the Heil Hitler salute at rallies. But let's move on. Also, someone, and I won't mention her name for the sake of their privacy, said, you need a true conservative on your show like me. And I responded by texting them or messaging them saying, if you've got any comments, tell them to me, and we'll comment on them. And I'm not opposed to having guests on the show. We've had guests before. We just have to work it out. That's all.
A competent, thoughtful conservative. Now, we got to make a distinction here. I would be interested in a maggot who could make sense, if there is such a thing. And I would definitely be interested in an intellectual conservative. But if you think the purpose of having a conservative on this show is to push back, we are not anti-conservative. Maggots are anti-conservative. I talked last week, we did a vocabulary lesson about the opposite ways that maggots use language. Maggots are much further from conservatism than Democrats are. In fact, by historic standards, Barack Obama would be a moderate conservative. So, yes, if an intellectual conservative wants to come on and make a conservative case, and likely I'll disagree with something. I'm not personally a conservative, but I'm not anti-conservative either. It's a different point of view. It's not a criminal hijacking. It's not a criminal cult like Trumpism is. And you've got to stop letting maggots tell you they're conservative, because they have violated everything conservatives have ever stood for.
Now, let's move on to another subject. This is more in your realm than mine, but it's brought to light because of the publicity around a woman that admittedly murdered her children. And the controversy is we know there's postpartum depression. Is there postpartum psychosis? And is that an excuse for violence?
So yes, there is such a thing as postpartum psychosis. And is it an excuse for violence? Well, I guess that's kind of a legal question, but the notion that, well, so first of all, up to 25% of women will experience postpartum depression. And it's pretty complicated. A lot of it is hormonal. I mean, your body just really gets yanked around when you go through a pregnancy. A lot of it is that your life changes, and in ways that no matter how prepared you think you are going to surprise you, and they're not all positive changes. I don't want to, actually I'll go on an anti-American pie, apple pie, baseball, and motherhood rant some other time. But this isn't an anti-motherhood thing, but it's to point out that people have this picture in their mind of how wonderful it's going to be when they're a mom, and most of it isn't like that. It's kind of like alcoholics. When they finally sober up, they find out the world is worse for a while before it gets better, and if they're not prepared for that, it'll undo their rehabilitation. Some postpartum depression is so severe that it requires medical assistance, and 25% might be a low estimate because we just didn't recognize it for a long time. We just didn't treat it like it was a real thing. Honey, it's just your hormones. You'll be fine. You'll love being a mom. And that's just not helpful. And we have seen cases in the past where women who were previously good moms, good wives, good people, just lost their minds and killed their kids during postpartum psychosis. So that's much rarer than postpartum depression, but it's definitely a real and recognized thing. Does this woman, is she an example of that? From the newspaper accounts, the media accounts, and remember, those are always a little suspect. But I would be inclined to say, yes, if I understand this story correctly, and I'm not sure that I do, she was fine. She was a good mom before that last child. And there doesn't seem to have been any reason, like any secondary gain for her to want to murder her own children. My guess is she feels as horrible about this as her poor husband does. And I don't think incarceration and further punishment have a role here. They wouldn't deter the next woman because it's a psychosis. You're not in control of your behavior, if that's what this is. Remember, I'm not close to the trial. I don't have direct information.
Let me say that besides the pregnancy, besides the hormonal change, besides the dietary change, then you add on that after a woman has a kid, the sleep deprivation. I don't think most men would handle it very well either.
No.
Now, I'm not making excuses for this horrible thing that happened, but I am saying that we need, I think, more understanding of it.
And perhaps more screening. I think one thing that has become more and more obvious to the medical community is we need to screen every woman during pregnancy, in the late stages of pregnancy, and in the early postnatal period. We need to be screening every woman for signs of depression, not just to prevent stuff like this, which is super dramatic, but also super rare, but because it's just a horrible burden and it makes it difficult for the mother-child bonding to proceed appropriately.
Are there signs? Are there warning signs?
Yes, people lose interest in things that used to interest them, and their behaviors will change. They may eat a lot more or a lot less. These are called vegetative signs. Sleep a lot more or a lot less. Their libido may crank way up or way down. And what these things have in common is that they are physiologic drives that either get wildly suppressed or wildly exaggerated. Those are among the things to watch out for. But really, these need to be professionally screened for. We should just assume that every woman who has a child should be screened like we would for much less common diseases.
Moving on, our deficit in America was raised by 8.9% during the first Trump administration, 8.9 trillion. Now it's been increased by 15 trillion. We're now looking at a national debt of $40 trillion. But the average guy will say to you in response, what do I care? It has nothing to do with me. It doesn't hurt me. I would say this affects the S&P. And what that does, it lets less nations loan us money. It also carries the debt on and on. Right now, I think the debt is $1 trillion a year in interest, something like that. It's going to take decades to get out of this. But how does it affect the average guy, do you know?
So one of the biggest non-negotiable line items in the federal budget is service on the debt, which means basically paying interest.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, we should separate the words deficit and debt. Deficit is the amount you spend each year greater than the amount you take in each year. To correct the deficit, we need to not let the wealthiest 1% off the hook for taxes. I personally don't think we need to actually raise taxes. More or less, throughout most of American history, the tax base has been about 20% of the GDP, and it has generally worked very well. We became the richest, most powerful nation in the world when that was pretty standard. I kind of like the deal that we almost made under the Clinton administration, where when we add $1 to the budget, we have to subtract $1 to the budget. The Republicans would like to balance the debt entirely by cutting programs, and the Democrats would like to balance the debt entirely by raising taxes. An economist would say you're going to need to do both. And there's a rational way to do that. We could collect more taxes simply by collecting what is actually owed by the wealthiest, and by not having so many exemptions for the super wealthy. And we could cut programs by merging programs that are redundant and by testing them for cost effectiveness. Which programs actually produce the results they're designed for, and are they producing them at a price that makes sense? Both the right and the left hate cost effectiveness litmus tests, and I think they're the only ones that make any sense. Everything should be tested on cost effectiveness. Are we getting good bang for our buck? If using those two strategies, we could reduce the deficit, but we'd have to do better than that. To bring the debt down, we have to stay in the black for a while. Now, Clinton produced the only surplus I've ever heard of in any administration in American history, but he was succeeded by Bush 1. And the first thing Bush 1 did was say, oh, we're collecting too much tax. Instead of buying down part of the debt, which would have reduced inflation, he basically used it as bribes. He said, I'm going to send out checks to everybody in America. They'll all get rebate checks. He hadn't even finished writing the checks before we had to raise taxes to pay for them. So if we could get a surplus for a while, and if we could use it to buy down the debt, that is one of the ways we could control inflation. that if I wanted to create inflation, the thing that Americans say they don't like, although Trump says he's very happy with it, he says he likes what he sees. He said that now many times. He's doubled down on that repeatedly. If I wanted to create inflation, I would A, start pointless wars and then have to replace all the expended military ammo and equipment. B, I'd stop taxing rich people. C, I would have tariffs on everything. Economists will tell you tariffs they drive inflation. That's why economists don't generally like tariffs. Targeted tariffs could make some sense, but these aren't targeted. So, and I would piss off every country that we import from. Those are things I would do immediately. Oh, and I would also get rid of all the low-cost labor by deporting all the migrant workers. Those things would raise inflation. So if you think inflation is a good thing, and Trump has said repeatedly that he does, these are the policies that create it.
Those said they would cut the budget, they'd cut the fat. But what in actuality, what they did was cut social programs, as many social programs as they could, and environmental programs, which is going to leave the country vulnerable. It's my opinion, nothing more than my opinion. But the reason they're not deporting people, the reason they're holding them in detention camps, is so they can use them for slave labor in farming and agriculture, because they don't have anybody anymore for that. The largest tomato grower in America moved to Mexico because he had no one to harvest his crops anymore, or not enough to do the job. I fear the country is going to face a food shortage like you haven't seen in years because of this, because of the lack of people that are here for harvesting. And it said, I read, now I don't know if it's true or not, but I read that one of the major industrial farms that recently has been caught up in the disease illnesses from farm produce is actually using detention workers. They give them $1.50 an hour, and they get $7.50 an hour. I don't know if that's true or not, but it goes right to the point of creating slave labor for millionaire farmers, for industrial farms.
So let me follow up on that, and we'll try to revisit that on our next show and see if we can establish whether that is actually the case or not.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying I read it.
I will say it's a long-standing dream of white nationalists to reinstate slavery. They sort of hate the idea. The notion of all men being created equal, which you would think patriots would stand next to that. I mean, it's one of the founding documents, right? The notion of all men, meaning all humans, created equal, is actually offensive to the white Christian nationalists, and they would love to bring back slave labor. And I would argue their anti-feminist stance is a form of that. Women should be shackled to men, and their use should be to create and raise children and then take care of old people. And they should stay out of the workforce and stay out of politics and just not have public opinions, because they should submit to their husbands who will do all the thinking for them. How is that not slave labor? Now, I'm not against somebody choosing to be a trad wife. What I'm against is preventing people from making other choices. I think everybody should choose their own path as much as possible. And speaking of vocabulary lessons, how have you knuckleheads not figured out that freedom and conformity are opposite words?
Well, as we raise our right arm up in the air and goose step in unison over the cliff like political lemmings, maybe we'll finally get the message. And I urge everybody to watch any of the videos from the Tate brothers. These two selfish, spoiled, sexist men, and I'm using the term loosely.
Yeah, let's not. I sort of consider myself a man, and I don't want to be lumped into any category that includes the Tate brothers.
They embarrassed my gender. Watch one of those and see if you can get through it without hating them. It's very hard because everything selfish, spoiled, self-serving, arrogant, non-caring is in those videos. Speaking of selfish and non-caring, Joe Rogan now is on a spiel in which he is claiming that Democratic Socialists are communists. If you want to take advice, I met Joe Rogan and worked with Joe Rogan numerous times. If you want to take advice from anybody, it wouldn't be Joe Rogan. I would say he's a nice guy, but no, he's not a nice guy. Bill Maher, I've worked with, and I don't find him a nice guy either. They're both very selfish. I think Bill Maher's going to lose his television audience. But let's move on, shall we? This is more of a medical question.
Actually, one last thing on that.
Oh, no.
Next time around, we're going to talk about the difference between socialism and communism. If you don't know that those are two different things, stop using grown-up words you don't understand.
Now, my parents used to get up. My mother was a housewife and worked very hard. My father was a farmer and a truck driver. They would get up and belt down 6, 7 cups of coffee every morning and then have more in the afternoon. And it affected them because later in life, they got these terrible headaches. And when the doctor questioned them, he said, well, you stopped drinking so much coffee. You're going to have to taper off. I drink 1 or 2 cups and I'm done. But I know people that get these big coffees, 16 ounce or 20 ounce from their local coffee shop, sit around and yak with a friend. And that's good. It's good to be social. But then they have more when they go home. I don't know how they do it. And all this studies were saying, well, coffee actually has benefits. The pros and cons of coffee.
So first of all, my name is Coffee. I absolutely love this stuff. In fact, I can have 5 or 6 cups of coffee. I've probably had about 8, 9, 10 cups of coffee today already, and it hasn't had any effect on me at all. Some people, when they drink coffee, they just lose their mind. They get all wired up and everything, and their heartbeat speeds up. They breathe real fast and they talk real fast, but not me. I can handle my coffee. I can handle twice as much coffee. In fact, I could handle bigger cups of coffee. Anyway, for a long time, I used to follow the literature on coffee, and 1 year coffee was bad for you, and another year coffee was good for you. So I started just reading the literature in even-numbered years, and I felt better about my habit. It's become more and more consistent that coffee is actually pretty good for us. But like every other kind of maxing, you can overshoot on that. Protein maxing, looks maxing, fiber maxing, coffee maxing also will be bad for you. So what is an appropriate number? Well, the medical consensus seems to be settling somewhere between 3 and 5 cups a day to get the maximum benefit without starting to get the side effects. What are the side effects? If you can have cardiac dysrhythmias, coffee can trigger them. If you have high blood pressure, coffee will raise it. So that would go against treating your own high blood pressure. Coffee itself doesn't usually cause headaches unless it's raising your blood pressure to a noticeable degree. Some people will feel high blood pressure as headaches. They're the lucky ones. Some people can't feel it when their pressure goes up, so they ignore it until it causes a stroke. More likely, coffee will cause headaches if you get in the habit of drinking so much that when you don't get enough coffee, you suffer a low-grade withdrawal. You do get somewhat addicted to coffee. I will experience fatigue, crankiness, and headaches if I stop drinking coffee. I know because I've tried a few times. But I love coffee. I don't really want to quit, so I haven't been as motivated as all that. So in moderate amounts, coffee does seem to be a little bit of a hedge against dementia, a little bit of a hedge against cancer, especially GI, colon cancers, things like that. It does seem to improve energy without really having much of a negative consequence. But in higher doses or for vulnerable people, dysrhythmias, high blood pressure, and headaches would be potential problems.
There was a trend for a while of people getting coffee enemas. The best part of waking up is Folgers up your butt.
No, that's true. And I want to talk about that for a second. Thank you for raising that. So I presume everybody knows, but I'll just say that an enema is when you put liquid in through the rectum that is designed to wash out the colon. And I can kind of see how it makes sense. I've known a number of people who were raised that way. Their parents gave them enemas on a regular basis growing up. And now, just as I don't feel okay if I don't shower regularly, By the way, today I kept walking to another room to get away from my own smell, and it didn't work, so I finally had to shower. Um, there are people who just don't feel clean if they don't get enemas. Um, my community, so evidence-based scientific medicine, does not endorse enemas. And there are some potential significant downsides. I'm getting to the coffee enemas, I promise. One is that your gut is protected. The whole lining of it is protected by a coating of mucus. And if you wash that coating off, your gut loses a lot of its protection.
And that is bile?
No, it's actually snot. It's mucus.
Okay.
Okay. And so
if you're having breakfast or lunch, I apologize, but go ahead.
we should have a trigger warning. Not my favorite topic either, but here we all are. All right. So the problem is that things that are in your gut that would normally be blocked from crossing, like bacteria and viruses, can then cross more easily. So you increase the likelihood of infection. Coffee enemas are usually pretty concentrated, and because of washing off the mucus, that caffeine hits more directly. Now remember, I said that maxing of any kind is going to turn out badly for you. A lot of people have killed themselves because you can legally buy caffeine powder online. And if you use large doses of it, it's like using too much methamphetamine or something. You can give yourself strokes and heart attacks and things. Well, that happened to some of the people who got coffee enemas. They wound up having seizures. Oh, by the way, that's another thing. Too much caffeine can give you seizures. So coffee enemas have done some real and demonstrable harm. And to my knowledge, they do not do any real and demonstrable benefit. So I would beg you, as a physician, I'm begging you, don't get coffee enemas. I think there's no good case for enemas in general. Naturopaths, you can write in. If you have some actual research you want me to look at, I'll take a look at it. But I know that coffee enemas have done actual harm because I had a friend who did research on that and was actually involved in some of these cases.
What about a decaf enema? Would that...
No, but it raises a really interesting point, which is that the benefits of coffee aren't tied strictly to the caffeine. While caffeine is good for things like test taking and stuff, the longevity benefits, the anti-cancer benefits, and the anti-dementia benefits of coffee do not seem to depend on caffeine. So if you like the taste and aroma of coffee, or you want the health benefits, but you don't like caffeine, or it gives you jitters, or you just don't like the idea of using a drug, decaffeinated coffee has nearly all of the benefits of normal coffee. And whether or not the addition of caffeine is the addition of a benefit or a harm is perhaps a little debatable. As an antioxidant, in fact, coffee outperforms even green tea. Whether we need those antioxidants is a whole nother story, but at least if we do, coffee would be the better choice.
In my opinion, coffee has become the modern day comfort food.
Yeah.
I like coffee, it's okay, but I think I have it in the morning because then and some people, they like their coffee break at work because this is their time. I don't have to worry about anything. I can sit and watch a mindless program on TV or just sit and think to myself and not have to worry. It's comforting to have this warm cup of liquid and not think of anything else. I allow myself that time. And in that respect, I think that would be mentally good for you.
I would agree with all of that. And coffee has a lot of overlay for me as well. It's tied to my uncle, who was my greatest mentor. And he was a real coffee connoisseur. He would roast green beans right before using them. There was a whole ceremony where he'd prepare this, and he knew how to make like espresso and Turkish coffee and a bunch of other kinds of fancy. He was, like I say, he was a genuine connoisseur. And sitting in his kitchen and chatting with him while he did that are some of my fondest memories. So the aroma, the body, the flavor, the temperature of coffee, all of those things are gratifying to me. But the original question was about the health effects, and coffee shines there as well.
I did a courtroom drama this week, and they had actual lawyers there as consultants, and we got into the whole McDonald's coffee thing. We'll have to save that for another program because we're out of time. But we'll get into that because it's a very, very interesting case and much more complicated than people realize.
Oh, I know. Do you mean the spilled one?
Yeah, the
Yeah, we'll
poor
talk about that.
elderly woman, they got burned so terribly. But we're out of time. So I'm Pete Christensen.
I'm Coffee Brown.
Don't forget,
Don't die dumb.
Thank you.